Welcome back, everyone. I'm Karen Helmstead, coming to you once again from Berlin on behalf of the Women's Forum Global Meeting 2021. And we're into our final session on this Day for Climate Action. Thanks very much to Mil Niepold for that last session on biodiversity, and to all of her guests, of course, for a fascinating discussion. We heard some very, very compelling stories from women working at the intersection of climate and gender and race for systemic long-term change. And a key point of research that I noted there from the Climate Investment Fund and from our guest Azy Kanpolat was that when women are in leadership positions, gender norms in their communities actually change. They shift. Men begin to perceive them differently. External actors perceive them differently. And that is what is going to bring some of these efforts forward. We also heard of the importance of bringing Indigenous voices to the forefront to help to tap into their knowledge of nature-based solutions, but of course that this tapping into should be through an engagement that is empowering and not extractive. So a lot of very interesting points made there in order to deliver nature-based solutions that will achieve climate action, not just talking about climate, but actual action, and supporting education for girls and women, of course, being a key call to action from that session. Well, finally, the COP26 climate talks in Glasgow may have concluded last week, but the real work starts now, and that is the title of this session. Especially given the clear gender and generation gap that we saw in Glasgow, how do we hold governments and businesses accountable for their commitments and their promises? And up next, we're very, very excited because very, very quickly, we've gathered some of the world's foremost climate activists to reflect on COP26 as a milestone, if one can call it that. Some people would disagree, I think, and how to accelerate some real action on science-based targets. So joining us for this session, this final sort of fireside chat, are Jennifer Morgan, who is the Executive Director of Greenpeace International. Welcome to you, Jennifer. Elizabeth Wathuti is an environment and climate activist and founder of the Green Generation Initiative in Kenya. I mentioned her in my introduction. She has literally just gotten off a plane in Nairobi, back from COP in Glasgow. So welcome to you, Elizabeth. Thanks for taking the time to be with us. And finally, Lily Cole has also joined us. She's a British model, actress, and entrepreneur, and an environmental campaigner. All three of these women were at COP. All three of them obviously have endless energy because here they are ready to give us their insights. And a warm welcome to all of them. And I'm going to hand over to Sophie Lambin, who is the CEO of Kite Insights, and she's the an editorial assistant for the Women's Forum here. And she's going to be moderating this conversation. So Sophie, it is a pleasure to hand you the floor.
Thank you very much, Karen, and very warm welcome to our speakers. As you said, Karen, huge amount of energy in each of you for your willingness to talk to us today after what has been an exhausting 2 weeks. I know in your case, Elizabeth, you literally just landed in Nairobi, so thank you to you. So what I'd like to make this conversation to be very interactive and really directing the question to the three of you and asking for your views, starting maybe with a general reaction on the outcomes of COP26. I think there is a consensus that it has been difficult, disappointing for many. But really, what are your views? And maybe Jennifer, I'll start with you.
Well, thanks so much, and it's a real pleasure to be here with you and with Elizabeth and with Lily as well. I think on the outcome here, it's really quite weak. It's very meek. It just keeps the 1.5 goal alive. But I think that there has been a signal that's been sent that the era of coal is ending, and that matters. But, you know, you think about it, that leaders were supposed to come and actually close the gap to 1.5 at this meeting, you know, and instead we have a temperature increase of going to 2.4 degrees, according to the Climate Action Tracker. And that is devastation for hundreds of millions around the world. So, you can't really talk that any other way. I think what I would just, two other points. One, I think, is that the text that is there, having this fossil fuel text in this agreement, which is the first time ever, sounds crazy, but up to this point in time, the fossil fuel interests have kept, with a consensus process, keeping any mention of fossil fuel subsidies or fossil fuel phase out, coal phase out of the text. That is because of activism. That is because of youth activists, indigenous peoples, similarly around the work that came through on getting more support, even again, just bare minimal, completely inadequate on adaptation for countries and beginning the much needed conversation on loss and damage. So a signal on fossil fuels, ability to come back to the table next year, but they should have done it this year, clearly.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. So some reason for hope and huge credit that you're giving to the role of activism in really pushing the agenda. Elizabeth, can I come to you? What are your general reaction and views apart from utter exhaustion from all the work you have done during these last 2 weeks?
Thank you. I think one of my main reflections from the COP and the reality check I always used to do was the fact that this COP was meant to keep 1.5 alive. And communities like mine continue to suffer from the impacts of the climate crisis every day. And even the day I got back home, there was so much statistics and things happening of people being impacted by the droughts in my country. And if we are to keep 1.5 alive, then emissions cannot continue to rise. And what I think for myself is that the outcomes will definitely deliver a 2.4 degrees world. And this outcome, I felt as though it was there to protect business as usual and to also protect the interests of rich countries and also the fossil fuel industry, because we cannot continue to sacrifice the lives and livelihoods of people who are being impacted by the climate crisis right now. So as a young person who is coming from a community where people are being impacted right now, the outcome should have been better, because it's not time to give promises or to think that words are going to save lives and livelihoods of people that are being impacted right now. And on the other hand, I saw a lot of solidarity from people who are out of the COP. They want immediate action. They want to see change. And these are the people that I think will bring the change that we want, because the leaders, I would say, at the COP failed us, because I did expect better as a young person, not what I got. So at a very large part of it, I am still grieving at the outcomes of the COP.
And Elizabeth, what sort of reception you expect to get when you go back to your community and explain the outcome of COP? What reaction from your community you expect to receive?
I mean, one of the things I mentioned to the leaders at the World Leaders Summit, I asked them to open their hearts and understand and feel the pain of the people in communities like mine that are facing this crisis. And one of the things that I mentioned on the last day of COP was that I don't want to ever do this again, come back to my community and tell them that I asked the leaders to open their hearts and none of them felt their pain. And this is something that has been in my mind every time, because I'm seeing in the news what's happening in my country. People are suffering, people are dying every day. There were some news headlines the other day of livestock that are lying dead because there is no water, and these communities need to survive every day. So seeing these realities and feeling their pain and just thinking to myself that the leaders still do not feel the pain of these people, and this does not give them an urge to want to act urgently or to give us an outcome that protects these people, because this is about their lives and livelihoods. And we cannot, it felt really bad that we leave Glasgow hoping that these leaders will come back and try again next year, and yet there's no time. There's no time, because people are suffering every day. And if we really care about humanity and if we are acting out of love for the people and the planet, then I don't think that's the kind of outcome we would have delivered to people who are suffering right now. So clearly, I left COP26 without answers for my people. But I think, on the other hand, just having, that capacity to act collectively with people who understand, people who feel the pain of others, I think that's what is going to continue changing things from the grassroots levels, because these people are not just facing the impacts, but they are also the ones on the front lines working on the solutions that we talk about every day.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for that. And we'll come back to that on the critical role of people working the grassroots, in particular women, in accelerating climate action. Lily, if I can turn to you and for you to share from your vantage point, your takeaway from COP and your general reaction. I think we'll come back to you, Lily, because you're currently frozen. Yes, we'll come back to Lily for her high-level reaction. So if I come back to you, Jennifer and Elizabeth, for now, the next question is, where do we move from here? You know, we have kept 1.5 degree alive. Christina Figueres was saying this morning we need to move on from keeping it alive to really putting it at the right at the center of our action and what we expect from government and from business. Can you share your view on how can we translate some of those priorities into relatable and actionable next step for business and policymakers and civil society? And as you think about this question, I'm going back to you, Lily, asking you for your reaction, general reaction to the outcome of COP.
Apologies, I don't know what happened there, but it was the first COP I'd been to, and I have to say I was quite disappointed by it. I was really inspired by the kind of momentum and level of discussion and engagement outside of the COP. So the marches that were going on, working with Indigenous leaders, with youth activists, talking to all the people who had kind of been drawn like a magnet to COP to try and deliver diverse and important messages. That gave me a lot of heart and courage. But when I went inside the COP itself, it felt like there was two parallel universes going on with not enough osmosis between them. It felt like a very kind of, sterile and cold environment that just the values that are so essential in terms of making the shifts that we need to make right now were not being baked into small decisions, whether it was the food that's being served or the language around sessions itself, like land use, for example, which is such kind of exploitative language when talking about our relationship with nature. And then in terms of the outcome, like many people, feel very disappointed that it feels so clear now, the scientific consensus on what needs to happen, and it feels so clear that there's a kind of public, huge public will behind being really ambitious, or at least moving towards the ambition needed by science. And it sort of just seems maddening to me that we're not receiving that that level of ambition from politicians, and that a few countries, it seems in particular, have been blocking that level of ambition. And actually that was something I was just thinking when you were speaking, Elizabeth, to say actually in response to your reflections, that you feel like disheartened that leaders didn't hear you on your call to open their hearts. I could be wrong, but my sense is that probably many leaders did, and that actually there are many of the leaders and negotiators there who wanted a more ambitious outcome, and who kind of, at least when I saw their response to Vanessa's speech later in the week, seemed to be really receptive to her calls. And it feels like maybe it's just a smaller minority of countries that have vested interests in fossil fuels, for example, that are blocking the level of ambition that we really need to see right now. And then the other thought I have to share is around whether even, to questioning, I guess, how much this outcome even means. Because if we look at what Paris agreed, and then the fact that we haven't actually delivered on those agreements, the emissions have continued to rise year on year since then actually how valuable is this document that we're dealing, we're kind of arguing over the details of what's in the document, if leaders and countries are not even going to fulfill on what's agreed to in the document, and whether this frame, how important is this framework in actually kind of casting out the future. And so, 2.4 is the analysis of where we'll get to if we deliver on all the pledges. But, are we actually going to deliver on all those pledges? Where is the accountability in it?
Well, this is a great lead into what was my question as you came back, Lily. So Jennifer, maybe I'll go to you. How do we build on this momentum, and how do we make this COP worthwhile for what's coming next?
Yeah, I think a great question. I mean, there's a number of different ways, right? There's, I think that on the topic of accountability, particularly around corporations, I mean, the other theme of this COP, really, I mean, there was a tremendous effort that was full of greenwashing. And you saw it coming in with net zero pledges that had massive offsets in them, both by countries and companies. And Greenpeace, that was a big priority, will continue to be a priority. So I think we will continue to be calling out those companies that are going against where we need to go. But I think one thing was that the Secretary General, this was also a small ray of hope for me, announced that he is setting up an independent group of experts to look at these net zero claims, whether they be from companies, whether they be from banks. There were all these big announcements about banks with, shifting the trillions, et cetera, whether it be around offsets, also local authorities seems to look at. And so with a view to moving into regulatory frameworks on this stuff, because it just cannot be that these companies can make these big claims and actually misinform or mislead consumers who think they might be doing something good by buying something, quote, climate neutral, when actually it has incredibly negative results. So I think that's one thing that needs to get done. Clearly, governments need to go home and hopefully, let's see, it's Monday. They should have looked at everything they got on the books and looked at how they're going to increase it, right? They should be thinking about what new laws they're going to be introducing. They should be thinking about how they're going to kick corporations and fossil fuel companies out of politics, right? They should be deciding, we're campaigning to get a ban on fossil fuel advertising in Europe. All of these things, because the public is there. And I think in many countries. And so I think that type of implementation, but scaling up the ambition along with the accountability is really fundamental. And that for us is really around a shift of power from corporations to people. And it's about, stopping new fossil fuel extraction and providing a just transition and an equitable transition for those who either have to shift out of their jobs, or in the case of developing countries, that they get the support they need.
Thank you, Jennifer, for those points. And to what Elizabeth was saying about hoping that the heart of leaders have been open to the reality, the lived experience of people in particularly in Africa. What is your response to what Elizabeth is saying about that?
I think, Elizabeth, your call for that was incredibly powerful. I think that the leaders I didn't speak to any heads of state, but I did speak to the senior kind of heads of delegation and ministers who were there. I think many of them heard that. I think, though, they didn't yet have the courage, because I think the thing is in every country there's these interests, to really step outside of their comfort zones and connect into what's happening really on the ground in places like Kenya. And so I think they all went a bit beyond their mandate. They certainly had to do so on, adaptation and loss and damage, some of them, but nowhere near where they need to, and they need to dig deeper.
Thank you, Jennifer. Elizabeth, if I go to you, I mean, clearly the power of the people has been instrumental in pushing the agenda. How are we going to now translate what has come out of COP or not to come out and translate that into action that is relatable to people on the ground in your communities and beyond? You represent both, obviously, your country, but also the youth movement. How are you going to keep the momentum and create the condition for accountability that Jennifer was just talking about?
I would say the real fight has just begun. And we can tell from the people power that we saw at the COP. Up to the last minute, people wanted change. People wanted the COP to deliver. And what is really important right now is that it's for us to understand that every individual can make this happen and every country can make this happen. And what is most important, and just to slightly go back to the aspect of opening your hearts, I think this is not something that anyone can learn through a 6-minute speech. It's a practice that we have to keep reminding ourselves every day. We have to keep learning and passing it on to everyone and to our leaders. And what is changing right now is the fact that we need to remember that we have to change the way COPs are being run, for example. I want a COP that is going to deliver, because what I saw from the past 2 weeks is that most of the leaders spent the 2 weeks telling us how they see the gaps on emissions, how they see the gaps on finance, the gaps on loss and damage, recognizing that the climate crisis exists. And what I did not see is them stepping up to fill those gaps, which I think needs to change. We want a COP where leaders are actually demonstrating what they're doing to keep the 1.5 alive, or what they're doing to save the lives and livelihoods of people that are in balance right now with the climate crisis. And I think this change and the power is going to come from the people. This is the time to continue organizing, mobilizing, tapping into the grassroots. People are working on solutions, like I mentioned, in countries like mine. They're not just on the front lines of the climate crisis impacts, but they're every day coming together in groups, trying to work on solutions. And what is going to happen is that with the people who understand what's happening around the world, we have to take it back down to our local level, to our countries. We have to hold our governments accountable, because it's at the end of the day, it's going to be about collective action. If there's no collective action, governments are going to still come to COP to protect their self-interests, to protect the interests of their countries. So we who understand have to hold them accountable down to the levels of our countries and recognize that this is a problem that's beyond the borders, that historical emissions are making people suffer in countries like in the sub-Saharan Africa. And it's time to hold, the leaders accountable. It's time to make sure that every action that we are doing right now and everything that is changing in every country right now puts the people who are on the front lines of the impacts, on the front line of the solutions and what they're doing right now. But I think this power and this change is going to really come from the people. So it is time for us, I think, to keep up the fight. I have been doing what I can. And I think right now I feel more energized to even continue working with the grassroots communities, to continue working with the children, to even make a more wider impact. And I think for us, the people, we need to make sure that the leaders are doing more, because they are not the hummingbirds, like I mentioned in the story of Wangari Maathai. They are not the hummingbirds. They are, they have so much capacity, they have so much resources to do much more than we can do. So it is up to us to continue mobilizing and, keep the fight alive, because if we give up, then there's no one who's going to fight for what we are fighting for. We are fighting for lives, we are fighting for livelihoods, we are fighting for a safe future. And I think if everyone holds onto this, I think we can definitely make that change happen, and we can transform how things are being done, because we've demonstrated that it's people power that is going to make this change happen, even from the just concluded COP26.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And I love the story of the hummingbird, which you said beautifully at COP. I just want to build on that point and ask the three of you to, we are the Women's Forum for the Economy and Society here, and we have been working for the last 3 years to really highlight the role of women's leadership in driving action, accelerating climate action, but accelerating action that is benefiting everyone. Today, we're launching a report on climate justice, which has a very strong gender component, on helping organizations to embed gender as they consider the climate strategy and activities. Can I ask you, and obviously you are three women leading in your own right, how would you describe the role of women in supporting the delivering of these commitments, not just as victim of climate change at the front line of climate, the negative impact of climate, but their leadership, how critical it is whether at grassroots level, at political level, at private sector level. And maybe Lily, I'll start with you with that question.
Thank you. I mean, I sort of, a strange way to answer it, but I sort of second what Elizabeth said around people power. And actually, it was kind of poignant at the very beginning of COP. I saw Patti Smith sing and sang in the Pathways to Paris, people have the power, people have the power. And coming out of COP, realizing, feeling a bit disillusioned by this structure, you know, that feels so flawed in so many ways, that we're kind of putting all of our hopes of humanity in, realizing that actually this structure is COP, you know, as a kind of political framework is important, but it's not the be all and end all. And actually the ambition of kind of any politician and also structures like COP will always be a reflection of public will. And the work from now onwards is to keep that kind of personal, public, people power aspect going as strong as possible, because that's essential. And that can be the pressure point that pushes up the level of political ambition that we need to see. And so with that in mind, like, women, everyone I think has a role to play, but women have, every single woman on this planet has an important role to play. And I think that there's so much data that shows that female leadership has kind of better environmental outcomes. And there's plenty of data you can look to. I actually wrote about it in my book. You can look to kind of make those points, that the empowerment of women in general terms will help with environmental outcomes. And so I would welcome and invite everyone to step up in a position of leadership on the environment, and women in particular to recognize that they need to be a big part of kind of, I guess, taking equal power so we can drive the changes we need to see.
Thank you, Lily. Jennifer, if I go to you with that question.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a number of different ways that women's leadership is needed at this moment to make this happen. I think one thing that is just so clear in a complex problem like climate change is the need for collaboration across many, many different kinds of people. Like whether it be getting even, you know, from a very concrete thing of working to shift, to an ecological farming system in a village, to getting a wind turbine built, the different pieces that have to come together of people, technical, different political interests. And I think that women are particularly strong in having a goal, getting it done, bringing people together in a way that moves us forward. And I think we need a lot of that right now on so many different levels. So that's one way. I think the other piece I would say is just in actually, getting more women in positions of power. I think the elections that are coming up in the next year are vital, and you see that it sounds a bit far away, but actually when you look at it, the women leaders around the world that have been working more to drive climate action is another key piece of it. And then just really speaking truth to power. I just feel that when it comes to really calling out what needs to happen, and I don't have the data to back this all up, Sophie, but my experience is that women are more ready to do that, to risk that. There's something very inherent in that, and we're going to need a lot of that moving forward.
Yes, and there is lots of data, Jennifer, that, I mean, above all, what we're trying to militate for here is equal contribution, equal ability to participate to the solutions. But women are undoubtedly early adopters of solutions and more willing to make the change that it calls for. As maybe a quick follow-up question on what you just said, I think a very tangible way that this contribution of women, not just as beneficiaries, but as designers of solution, as allocators of capital, could be reflected is how we bring a gender lens to the hundreds of millions of dollars that will be deployed towards mitigation and adaptation. And we don't see that happening yet systematically. Or have you seen any signal of bringing a gender lens to investment in adaptation and mitigation being part of the conversation at COP?
I can't say I really have, no. And I agree that I think that is fundamental, because that perspective and the diversity and the approaches, I think, will move us forward and needs to be integrated into all of that decision making.
Can I add one thought here as well? Sorry. And I think that's a really interesting point around financing that I hadn't thought about in the lens. But also that I think it's important to distinguish between feminine leadership as opposed to only being female leadership. And your point, Jennifer, around like collaboration, I think collaboration is absolutely essential right now on so many deep levels in order to get through the challenges that we're dealing with. And that more you can have women who are in positions of leadership that don't necessarily embody a different type of leadership. There are some good examples in British politics, I would say, of that. And there are also men who are amazing kind of feminists, for want of a better phrase, who've been able to kind of really show a different type of leadership that's much more collaborative. And I think it's important to make that distinction so that we can, recognize that it's a different type of leadership we need. And yes, women might be more, in general terms, inclined towards a different type of leadership, but men are also able to embody that different type of leadership too. We need more collaborative leadership that's less individual focused, less ego-driven, less competitive, to drive towards the kind of the hugeness of the challenge that we have to lead through right now.
Thank you, Lily. We are going to have to close very quickly, so maybe I would like to circle back to you, Elizabeth. You closed the plenary at the New York Times Climate Hub 2 days ago, and the framing was about the reason to believe, the reason for optimism. Maybe if you could finish on a note that you might find appropriate, of hope or not, on what are your reasons to believe. And then I'll quickly go to you, Lily, and then to you, Jennifer.
Thank you. I will close it on a note of what keeps me going, because I stopped hoping and instead I decided to lean on the love for people and our planet. And I think that to me would be the most important thing that everyone should lean on right now, because hope is going to be meaningless if it's not followed by action. But then if we hold on to the love of the people in our planet, then we are going to do the right thing and do what's supposed to be done. And I think also the other most important thing is that we, the people who really understand and feel strongly what's happening, we are the ones that are being greatly disturbed by the challenges that are happening in our planet today. And we who feel disturbed, I think we need to continue stepping up and doing what we can, and also continue stepping up and making sure that our leaders are also doing what they must do right now. Because if we all continue to remain silent, then the leaders are probably not disturbed as we are. So we who are disturbed are the ones who are going to make that real change happen. And it is important that we also hold on to the love for the people and our planet, because then if we keep hoping, if we keep hoping that things are going to change, they're probably never going to change anyway if nothing is done right now. So I think what's really most important is the fact that we do what we're doing right now, not because someone else is not doing it, but because we understand the struggles that humanity is facing, because we understand the state in which humanity has put nature and our planet into. And we do this out of love. I've strongly held on to this because I've seen my ecosystems changing over time as a child. The natural world that my friends and I knew as children has at some point changed completely before our eyes. And if I did not hold on to the love for that natural ecosystem, I would probably still not be fighting for it, because then I would probably give up. But I think holding on to that deep sense of humanity and believing in the fact that collectively we can make change happen is what is definitely going to change this world. And then we who have that feeling then will draw the rest of the world, because at the end of the day, it's going to take a mass movement as well to make things change or to make things happen quickly. And it's a mass movement right now already. So many people are joining. And I think that to me is what should keep everyone going. And also knowing that we are not alone in this fight. Billions of people out of the world want to see things changing. So I just want everyone to hold on to that love for the people in our planet. And I think there's not going to be a point in time where you will step out of the fight. So we will all continue to fight on because we strongly love this planet and because we strongly love the people, and we want to protect the next generation as well.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That's a wonderful way to end. Jennifer and Lily, can I just say maybe in one or two words, your reason to believe, Lily?
One or two, that's tough. I'd say the people, the amazing people who were there last week, and also to quote the Secretary General, the seeds that were planted. You know, there are a lot of really good seeds planted the last 2 weeks, and we've got to help them germinate now.
Thank you, Lily. Jennifer?
Yeah, I would build on that and just say connection and solidarity and the power of us, and the knowledge deeply that, you know, we are nature and nature is us, and to support those seeds as they grow.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, Jennifer, Lily. You have really all taken us through a whole range of emotion, from grief to compassion to rage and ultimately to love. Elizabeth, perhaps what I will take away is that courage is really vital for leaders and policymakers to step out of the comfort zone and to do something that is radically different. And that's really mobilizing their heart, maybe at the level of the head. If I capture what you said, Jennifer, we will need a great deal of accountability, experts like yourself holding actors accountable to their big claims, and private sector, business and government ensuring that they truly meet their real science-based target. And if you then talk about the hands, the agency, the most important is perhaps, and the biggest reason to hope, is your message that the power is really in all our hands. And this is, interestingly, the topic of our global meeting this year, about rebalancing power from corporation and political structures like COP back to the people. So let me thank you so much for those words of encouragement, wisdom, and outrage, which we're taking with us as we embark in the next few days of the Women's Forum Global Meeting. With that, I would like to hand over back to Karin to close the session, and thank you again very much to all of you. Karin, over to you.
Thanks very much to Sophie Lambin. Thanks so much, Sophie, and thanks to you, Elizabeth, and Jennifer and Lily. An absolute powerhouse panel that we had there, and thanks very much to all of you for enabling us to pull that together at such short notice. And this conversation was really not only proof of the incredible female energy out there, but also to the fact that women have an incredible ability to call a spade, to call out the weakness of this outcome. There was huge disappointment that we heard there at the outcomes of COP26. There's no good way to talk around it, as Jennifer Morgan said. And I guess we can just really take inspiration from the words of Elizabeth Wathuti. The real fight has just begun, and we heard lots of insights there that it's people and civil society who do want change. The power is with the people, and obviously that people power is about to persist, and it will prevail. So thanks very much to all of them. There is much to do after COP26, but women's resolve and ability are a huge source of inspiration, and their ability to mobilize and to connect and collaborate will be key. Well, with that, it's been a total thrill to moderate this day, to take you through this session. It's time to wrap up. I hope you enjoyed it. And as we said earlier, there are many more to come as the week goes on, a specific topic every day. And do remember our motto for this 2021 Women's Forum Global Meeting: Her and Now, uniting purpose and power for equality. By being here, you really are part of that mission, and you just heard some incredibly inspiring voices. So I hope that you can make the most of the sessions this week, take a lot of inspiration with you, and forward into your day-to-day to continue this fight and continue this journey that is ours, everyone's, women, men, everyone, animals, the entire planet. So enjoy the rest of the week. Do stay safe, stay focused, and all the best from me in Berlin, and bye-bye.